They say home is where the heart is. A sanctuary. But what happens when your sanctuary becomes a war zone? When the person you promised you're forever to becomes the enemy commander? What happens when the territory being fought over is the hearts of your own children, and the weapons used against you are whispers and lies? My war didn't have bombs or bullets. It was a silent, invisible battle fought within my own walls. And this is the story of how I survived it. My story begins where so many others seem to end. It begins with the illusion of a perfect life. An illusion I had meticulously crafted and fiercely protected. The kind of life you see in commercials. I can still smell it if I close my eyes. The rich, dark scent of coffee brewing in the early morning light. A promise of a new day. The sound of our children's laughter echoing down the hallway. A sound I thought was the very definition of joy. The sight of their crayon masterpieces, lopsided sons and stick-figure families, held proudly on the refrigerator by silly alphabet magnets. This was my world. It was built on a foundation of us, a partnership I believed was bulletproof, a love I thought was the one, great, unshakable truth of my life. I felt safe, I felt seen, I felt home. Security is a fragile thing. You don't realize it's made of glass until you hear it shatter. For me, the sound was a quiet ping, the sound of a text message on a phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. It wasn't meant for me. It was a single gut-wrenching moment where the entire architecture of my life collapsed. The words on that screen didn't just break my heart. They vaporized the ground beneath my feet. In that instant, the man I had shared my bed with, my dreams with, my children with, became a complete stranger. His face, so familiar, suddenly looked like a mask. The warmth in his eyes, a calculated performance. I thought the pain of infidelity was the worst feeling a human could experience. I thought that was rock bottom. I had no idea it was just the first step on a long, terrifying descent into hell. The first confrontation was a masterclass in denial. His words were a whirlwind of accusations and deflections. You're being paranoid. You're crazy. You're imagining things. He twisted my pain into a weapon against me, making me question my own sanity. It's a terrifying thing to have your reality dismantled piece by piece by the person you trust the most. But the evidence was undeniable, and the lies, no matter how skillfully delivered, couldn't erase the truth I had seen. The us I had believed in was a fiction, and our home, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a cage. The air grew thick with unspoken words and silent accusations. The laughter of our children, once a source of pure joy, now felt like a fragile treasure I had to protect from the poison seeping through the walls. The decision to leave was the hardest I've ever made. It felt like tearing myself in half. But staying meant suffocating. It meant accepting a life built on a lie. I packed my bags, and with them, the shattered remnants of my dreams. I thought that was the end of the war. I thought we would move on to the sad, quiet work of separation. I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was a declaration of a new, far more brutal war. And I was about to discover that the territory he was determined to conquer was the one thing I could not bear to lose, the hearts and minds of our children. The divorce wasn't a peaceful separation. It was a strategic campaign launched with cold, calculated precision. The first legal documents arrived, filled with language so foreign and hostile, it felt like they were about someone else's life. The man who once whispered, "I love you," was now painting me as an unstable, unfit mother, in formal, notarized letters. Our home, our shared life, was reduced to a list of assets to be divided. But I quickly learned that the most valuable assets weren't the house or the bank accounts. They were our children, and he was prepared to use them as leverage, as shields, as weapons. The first volley in this new war was subtle, a whispered comment after a weekend visit. My son came home and, while putting away his toys, casually said, "Daddy says you don't love us anymore because you broke our family." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't his words, they were coached. A script he was repeating without understanding its venom. Then it was my daughter. Her eyes filled with a confusion that broke my heart. "Mommy, why did you leave us?" Not, "Leave Daddy," but "Leave us." The distinction was a carefully planted seed of abandonment, designed to grow into a tree of resentment. It escalated quickly. Their hugs became hesitant, their "I love yous" felt cautious, as if they were betraying someone else by saying them to me. Phone calls I made to them on his time would go unanswered. Scheduled visits would be canceled at the last minute with flimsy excuses. A sudden fever, a surprise birthday party, a forgotten school project. Each canceled plan, each unanswered call, was a dagger. It was a systematic campaign of erasure. He was trying to slowly, methodically remove me from the canvas of their lives, painting himself as the only parent, the stable one, the victim. This is the silent, vicious war of parental alienation. It's a psychological battle where love itself is weaponized, and your own children become unwitting soldiers fighting against you. The legal system, the very place I turned to for protection, felt like a foreign land with a language I couldn't speak. How do you prove a whisper? How do you present evidence of a hesitant hug or a suspicious glance? I sat in sterile conference rooms, my hands trembling, trying to explain the covert emotional abuse to lawyers who just wanted facts and figures. They saw custody as a matter of schedules and logistics, not a battle for a child's soul. Every court hearing was a trial by fire. I'd spend sleepless nights drowning in paperwork, my stomach churning with anxiety, preparing to have my character, my very essence as a mother, publicly assassinated. I watched as a system, so often blind to the nuances of psychological warfare, failed to see the truth. I felt profoundly, terrifyingly alone, fighting a war no one else could see. The self-doubt was a constant, paralyzing whisper in my ear. Am I strong enough to survive this? What if he wins? What if I lose them forever? I remember one afternoon distinctly. It was the day of my daughter's school play. I had a new dress for her, her favorite color. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. I arrived early, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. I saw her across the auditorium with her father. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of the little girl I knew. Then, he leaned down and whispered something in her ear. Her face clouded over. She turned away from me, her shoulders tensed, and refused to look at me again for the rest of an afternoon. I sat there, alone in a crowd of happy parents, and felt a coldness so deep, I thought it might shatter my bones. That was my rock bottom. In that silent, public rejection, orchestrated by the man I once loved, I felt the full, crushing weight of my powerlessness. I went home that night, and I didn't just cry, I felt like I was disintegrating. But it's in the deepest, darkest pits that the first spark of light can appear. It wasn't a lightning bolt of courage. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift inside me. Lying in bed that night, hollowed out by grief, a single thought broke through the noise. He does not get to write my story. He does not get to decide who I am. That was it. It was the decision to stop being a character in his twisted narrative and to become the hero of my own. Courage, I learned, isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act in spite of it. And for me, it started with small, daily choices. The choice to get out of bed when my grief felt like a physical weight pinning me down. The choice to open the curtains and let the sunlight in. The choice to call a friend and speak my truth, even when my voice trembled. I fired the lawyer who treated my case like a business transaction and hired one who looked me in the eye and said, "I believe you." I made an appointment with a therapist who gave me the language for what I was experiencing: gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, parental alienation. Just having the words, the validation that I wasn't crazy, was like being given a shield. My most important act of defiance was creating a new home. Not just a place to live, but a true sanctuary. It was a small apartment, with secondhand furniture and walls I painted myself, but it was ours. It was a space free from toxicity, a place where truth was spoken, where feelings were validated, and where love was unconditional. It was a fortress of peace. I filled it with the smell of baking cookies, the sound of our favorite music, and new drawings for the refrigerator. It was here, in this safe harbor, that I began the slow, patient work of rebuilding the bridges with my children. I never fought his lies with my own. I didn't badmouth him or force them to choose sides. Instead, I chose to be the calm in their storm. I became consistency. I became stability. I became unwavering love. When they repeated a lie they'd been told, I would gently counter it with the truth, not with anger, but with quiet conviction. I know that's what you were told, but here is what I know to be true. I have always loved you, and I will never, ever stop. I showed them my love through actions, not just words. I was there for every school pickup I was allowed, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. Slowly, painstakingly, the seeds of truth began to take root. I started to see glimmers of my children again, a spontaneous hug, a shared secret, and "I love you, Mom," that came from their hearts, not from a script. Each one was a victory. Each one was a testament to the fact that real love is more powerful than any manipulation. The woman telling you this story today is not the same woman who found those text messages all those years ago. Her voice no longer trembles. It is steady. It is resilient. It is unapologetically strong. I haven't erased my past or forgotten the pain. I've integrated it. My scars are not a map of my damage. They are a testament to my survival. The ashes of my former life didn't bury me. They became the fertile soil for my rebirth. This isn't a happily ever after story. It's a strong ever after story. My happiness is no longer defined by my relationship status or by anyone else's approval. It's defined by my own wholeness. It's found in the quiet peace of my sanctuary, in the genuine laughter of my children, in the strength I discovered in the wreckage. I taught my children the most valuable lesson I could. That truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always finds its way to the light. If you are watching this, and my story echoes in the hidden chambers of your own heart, if you are at the beginning, the middle, or what feels like the end of a similar journey, I want you to hear me. The war you are fighting may feel impossible. The loneliness may feel absolute. But the strength you are about to discover within yourself, the fierce, unbreakable power of a spirit that refuses to be extinguished, will be your greatest victory. You are not alone. And your happy ending isn't about finding new love, it's about finding yourself again. Before you can understand the war, you have to understand the peace. You have to understand what was lost. Because it wasn't just a marriage, it was a world. A world he and I built together, or so I believed. And it all started in the most ordinary of places on the most ordinary of days. It was a bookstore. One of those old, dusty ones, where the smell of paper and coffee hangs in the air like a permanent, comforting fog. I was in the history section, tucked away in a corner, completely lost in a book. I remember the light was hitting the dust motes just right, making them dance in the air. And then, there was this voice. A low, calm voice that said, "That's a good one, but the sequel is even better." I looked up, and there he was. He wasn't movie star handsome in a way that takes your breath away. It was something quieter, more real. He had this easy smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners, and he looked at me not like he was looking sad at me, but like he was already seeing me. My first impression wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a feeling of recognition, like a part of my soul just relaxed and said, "Oh, there you are." We talked for 2 hours, right there between the shelves of forgotten kings and fallen empires. He was smart, but not in a way that made you feel dumb. He was funny, with a quick, dry wit that caught me off guard and made me laugh from my belly. But the thing that truly drew me in was the way he listened. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to speak. He was leaning in, his eyes locked on mine, absorbing every word as if it was the most important thing in the world. In that crowded, quiet bookstore, he made me feel like I was the only person on the planet. In those early days, he was everything you read about in books, everything you hope for when you're young. He was the man who showed up with soup when I was sick, the man who remembered the name of my childhood dog. He had this incredible ambition, this drive to build a great life, but he framed it all around us. It was always our future, our dreams. He demonstrated a kind of profound kindness not just to me, but to everyone, to waitstaff, to elderly people on the street. He seemed to possess a fundamental goodness, a solid moral core that I thought was unshakable. He made me feel safe. With him, I felt like I could finally lay down my armor. I thought I had found a man whose strength was in his gentleness. There's one night I replay in my mind, a memory so clear, it feels like I could step right back into it. We'd been dating for about a year, It was a Tuesday, nothing special. We were in our tiny first apartment, the one with the crooked floors and the radiator that hissed all night. We were painting the living room, a ridiculous shade of yellow I'd insisted on. We were covered in paint, laughing, music playing from a small radio. Suddenly, he stopped, took the roller out of my hand, and pulled me into the middle of the room. He took me in his arms and started slow dancing with me, right there on the newspaper-covered floor. There was no music playing that you could dance to, just some random rock song. But he hummed his own tune, a little off-key, and swayed with me. And in the middle of our dance, he stopped and looked at me, his eyes so serious, so full of what I was sure was love. He said, "This is it, right here. This is what I want for the rest of my life. Just this, you and me, building something beautiful in the middle of the chaos." He kissed me, and I tasted paint and promise. In that moment, standing in our messy, half-painted living room, I didn't just love him. I believed in him. I believed in us. That promise felt more solid than the floor beneath our feet. It was the cornerstone of the life I was about to build. A life I never imagined could be burned to the ground. That promise, made on a paint-splattered floor, became the blueprint for our life. The transition from dating to marriage felt less like a step and more like a natural unfolding, like a river inevitably finding its way to the sea. We just fit. The question wasn't if we would get married, but when. And the when it came, was just as quiet and perfect as that first meeting in the bookstore. It was a Saturday in October. The air was crisp, and the leaves were turning those impossible shades of fire and gold. We'd spent the day hiking, just wandering through the woods, our hands linked, the silence between us as comfortable as the conversation. We found a small clearing with a view that stretched out over the entire valley. We sat on a fallen log, sharing a thermos of coffee, and just breathing in the world. He didn't get down on one knee. There was no grand speech. He just turned to me, his face serious but his eyes smiling, that crinkled smile I loved. He took my hand, the one not holding a coffee cup, and said, "I don't ever want to have a day that doesn't end with you. I don't want to see a view like this and not have you standing next to me. Will you build the rest of your life with me?" It was so simple, so him. It wasn't a question about a wedding. It was a question about a life, and my answer was the easiest word I've ever spoken. I said yes, and we sealed it not with a diamond ring right away, that came later, but with a kiss that tasted like coffee and cold air and the absolute certainty of forever. Our first few years of marriage were a blur of beautiful construction. We were architects of our own small universe. We bought a house, a little fixer-upper, that nobody else wanted. We spent every weekend tearing down walls and putting up new ones, our hands covered in plaster, and our hearts full of plans. We'd sit on the floor of the empty living room, eating pizza out of the box, and sketching out our future on napkins. A tire swing on the big oak tree in the backyard for the kids we knew we'd have. A reading nook by the window for me. A workshop in the garage for him. Our dreams weren't extravagant. They were about substance. About roots. He was climbing the ladder at his firm, working long hours, but he always framed it as being for us. "I'm building a fortress for this family," he'd say. And I believed him. I was his biggest cheerleader, his softest place to land. I took care of our home, turning that broken-down house into a sanctuary, a place of warmth and welcome. We were a team, a true partnership. He was the engine, and I was the heart. Together, we were unstoppable. And we were happy, genuinely, deeply happy. The kind of happiness that sinks into your bones and becomes a part of you. It was in the small things. The way he'd always bring me the first cup of coffee in the morning, exactly how I liked it. The way I'd find little notes he'd tucked into my coat pocket on cold days. It was in the big things, too. The day we brought our son home from the hospital, the three of us curled up on the couch, this tiny, perfect human sleeping on his chest, and I felt a love so fierce, so overwhelming, I thought my heart would burst. But if I had to pinpoint one single moment, one memory, that stands as the high water mark of our love, it would be the birth of our daughter. It was a long, difficult labor. I was exhausted, scared, and felt like I had nothing left to give. But he was there. He never left my side. He held my hand so tight, I thought my bones might break, but it was an anchor. He looked into my eyes, and he breathed with me. He was my strength when I had none left. And then, she was here, this perfect, screaming, beautiful little girl. The nurses cleaned her up and placed her in my arms. I looked at her, this miracle we had made, and I was just undone. Tears were streaming down my face, and when I looked up at him, he wasn't looking at our daughter. He was looking at me. His face was a masterpiece of pure, unfiltered emotion, awe, gratitude, and a love so profound it was like looking directly into the sun. He reached out and gently brushed the hair from my face, his fingers trembling slightly, and he whispered, so quietly that only I could hear, "You are a wonder. You are my everything." In that moment, in that sterile, fluorescent-lit hospital room, I felt like the most cherished woman on earth. I felt seen, not just as a wife or a new mother, but as the very center of his world. That look, that single, unguarded moment of pure adoration, became my North Star. It was the memory I would cling to in the dark. It was the proof, the undeniable evidence that what we had was real, true, and unbreakable. It was the pinnacle of the mountain, and I had no idea I was about to be thrown off the edge. Looking back, the cracks didn't appear with a thunderclap. They started as hairline fractures so fine you could only feel them if you ran your hand over the surface of our lives in just the right light. The change began after our daughter was born, right after that moment in the hospital I held onto as my proof of everything. It's ironic, isn't it? The moment our family felt most complete was the moment it began to break apart. His ambition, which I had always admired as a force for our family, began to feel like a force that was pulling him away from it. The long hours at the office became longer. The business trips became more frequent. When he was home, he wasn't really there. He was a ghost at our dinner table. His body present, but his mind a million miles away. His face illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone, which had suddenly become a fortress in itself, guarded by a new password, and a screen that was always angled away from me. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, the pressure of a growing family, a demanding career. I tried to be the supportive wife, the understanding partner. I'd make his favorite dinner, and he'd eat it while scrolling through emails, offering a distracted, "This is great, honey." I'd try to tell him a funny story about the kids, and he'd look up, his eyes unfocused, and say, "Sorry, what was that?" The silence between us grew louder than any conversation. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with everything I was too afraid to ask, and everything he was clearly unwilling to say. I remember one Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard with the kids. They were running through the sprinkler, their shrieks of laughter filling the air. It was a perfect, golden afternoon. I looked over at him, sitting on the porch, and he was just staring into the distance, a look on his face I'd never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was absence. A complete and utter vacancy. I called his name, and he didn't even flinch. It was like I was shouting across a canyon. In that moment, surrounded by my beautiful life, I had never felt more alone. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't stress. This was something else. This was an erasure. When I finally found the courage to voice my fears, to say the words, "I feel like you're slipping away from me," that's when the real poison started to seep in. He didn't reassure me. He didn't hold me and say we'd figure it out. He turned it into a weapon against me. "You're being needy," he'd say, his voice laced with an irritation that made me feel small. "I am working my tail off to give you and the kids this life, and all you can do is complain? Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under?" He'd make me feel guilty for wanting his attention. He'd make me feel ungrateful for the very life he was using as an excuse to abandon us. It was a masterful, cruel kind of manipulation. He would build me a beautiful cage and then get angry when I rattled the bars. My reality became a moving target. If I was sad, I was being dramatic. If I was angry, I was being irrational. If I was scared, I was being paranoid. He was systematically dismantling my confidence, my intuition, making me believe that the problem wasn't his distance, but my perception of it. I started to question myself. Maybe I was being crazy. Maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe this was just what marriage was, and I was the one who was broken. And then came the moment the floor fell away. It was a Tuesday. I remember the mundane details with a clarity that still haunts me. The smell of lemon cleaner in the air. The hum of the refrigerator. The kids were at school, and the house was quiet. His phone was on the granite countertop, charging. He never left his phone. Never. It was like a third limb. But he'd been in a rush that morning, a forgotten file, and he'd run back out, leaving it behind. It buzzed. A text message. I wasn't gonna look, I swear to you, I wasn't. But the screen lit up, and the preview was right there. It wasn't just words. It was a name I didn't recognize. And next to it, a string of heart emojis. And the words are burned into my memory like a brand. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Time stopped. The humming of the refrigerator faded into a roar in my ears. A wave of heat washed over me, so intense I thought I might pass out. My hands started to shake, and I had to grab the edge of the counter to keep from falling. I stared at that screen, at those words, and the entire world I had built, the life I believed in, the man I loved, the future I had sketched on napkins. It all just vaporized. It turned to dust in an instant. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the confirmation that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid. My intuition had been screaming at me for months, and I had let him convince me it was a liar. In that moment, the man from the bookstore, the man who slow danced with me on a paint-splattered floor, the man who looked at me in that hospital room like I was a wonder, he died. And in his place stood a complete and utter stranger, a monster wearing the face of my husband. I spent the rest of that day in a fog, moving through my house like a ghost. I made the kids dinner, I helped them with their homework. I read them a bedtime story, my voice a hollow echo of itself. Every smile, every touch, every "I love you" felt like a lie. He came home late. I was sitting in the dark in the living room, waiting. He flipped on the light, and for a second, he looked startled. "Hey, you're still up," he said, his voice casual as he loosened his tie. That casualness, that normalcy, it was like a lit match on gasoline. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. My voice was eerily calm. "Who is she?" He froze, and I watched his face transform. There was no flicker of guilt, no moment of shame. His expression hardened into something cold and defensive. "What are you talking about?" "Your phone," I said, my voice starting to tremble. "You left it here this morning. I saw the message." And then came the masterclass. He didn't confess. He attacked. "You went through my phone," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything I do for you, you invade my privacy like that? What is wrong with you?" He took 3 steps toward me, and I physically flinched. "You're so insecure you have to invent things to be upset about? You're creating drama because you're bored?" He kept coming. He was twisting my discovery into a character flaw, my pain into a pathology. He was painting me as the villain of a story he had written. I looked into the eyes of the man I had promised my life to, the father of my children, and I saw nothing. No recognition, no love, just a cold, calculating rage that I had dared to uncover his truth. That was the moment I knew my marriage wasn't just broken, it was a lie. And the man standing in front of me wasn't just a husband who had strayed. He was an enemy. And our home, my beautiful sanctuary, had just become a war zone. The first battle was over. And I had already lost. For a few weeks after that first confrontation, we lived in a state of Cold War. We were 2 armed nations, sharing a border, moving silently through the same house, breathing the same poisoned air. I was sleeping in the guest room. The silence was a constant, screaming thing. I was playing a part for the children, a hollowed-out version of Mommy, pasting a smile on my face that felt like it was cracking my skin. I was waiting. I don't know what for. An apology? A moment of remorse? A sign that the man I had married was still in there somewhere. The final straw wasn't a shout, it was a whisper. It was a Friday night. I was in the kitchen, packing the kids, lunches for a school field trip the next day. The mundane rhythm of it, a small comfort. He walked in, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and intimate. He didn't even acknowledge me. He was pacing by the back door, his back to me, but I could hear fragments. "No, she's right here. Don't worry about it. I'll handle it. I miss you too." He was talking to her, in our home, 10 feet away from me. He was soothing her, reassuring her, while I stood there holding a juice box, my heart turning to ice in my chest. He wasn't just having an affair. He was building a new life in the rubble of ours, and he expected me to just stand there and watch. He hung up the phone, turned around, and saw me standing there. He didn't look guilty, he looked annoyed. Annoyed that I had overheard, annoyed that I existed. In his eyes, I was no longer a person. I was an obstacle. That was it. That was the moment the waiting ended. The tiny flickering hope that we could fix this was extinguished. You cannot fix something with someone who doesn't even see you. I put the juice box down on the counter, my hand perfectly steady. I looked at him, not at the mask he wore, but at the cold stranger behind it, and I said the word. Divorce. It didn't come out as a question or a threat. It came out as a verdict, a final, irrevocable sentence. For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never occurred to him that the obstacle might choose to remove itself. Then, his face changed. The annoyance hardened into something else, something cold and sharp, a predator's focus. He didn't say, "Let's talk about this." He didn't say, "Are you sure?" He took a step toward me, his voice a low growl. "You have no idea what you just started. You think this is bad? You're going to regret this for the rest of your life." It wasn't the plea of a heartbroken husband, it was the promise of an enemy commander. The days that followed were a surreal nightmare. We told the kids we were separating, using gentle, practiced words that felt like lies. How do you explain a war in language a child can understand? I watched their faces crumble, their world fracturing in real time, and I knew I was inflicting the first of many wounds I could never fully heal. That pain was a physical weight, heavier than anything I had ever carried. I packed my life and my children's lives into cardboard boxes. Each object felt like an artifact from a dead civilization. The coffee mug he gave me on our first anniversary. The kids' height chart we'd marked on the pantry door. Every packed item was a funeral. Friends and family descended with well-meaning advice. Are you sure you're doing the right thing? Think of the children. They saw a marriage ending. They didn't see the war that had already begun. I felt utterly terrifyingly alone. The divorce process was not a separation. It was an assault. The first wave was the paperwork. I remember sitting in my new lawyer's office, a woman with kind eyes but a warrior's spirit, and she slid a stack of papers across the desk. It was his petition. I read the words he had used to describe me. Mentally unstable, prone to emotional outbursts, an unsafe environment for the children. These weren't legal terms, they were character assassinations. Carefully crafted lies designed to strip me of the one identity I had left: mother. The battle wasn't over the house or the money, it was over the children. He filed for sole custody, claiming I was unfit. Every week brought a new skirmish, a new motion filed, a new accusation. Our life became a series of sterile, hostile environments: mediation rooms, lawyers, offices, and eventually, a courtroom. I will never forget the first day in court. I wore a gray suit, my armor for the day. I sat at a polished table, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap, my knuckles were white. He was sitting less than 20 feet away, but he might as well have been on another planet. He never looked at me. He just stared straight ahead, conferring with his lawyer, his face a mask of detached confidence. He took the stand, and he lied. He told stories that were grotesque funhouse mirror versions of our life. He took my grief and reframed it as instability. He took my fear and called it paranoia. He painted a picture of himself as the long-suffering husband, the heroic father trying to protect his children from their hysterical mother. I had to sit there, silent, and listen to the man I had built a life with systematically dismantle my reality, my character, my soul, under oath. The system demanded I remain calm, composed. To show any emotion would be to prove his point. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, to sit in that fire and not scream. The day we signed the final papers was gray and drizzling, which felt appropriate. We weren't in the same room. The documents were shuttled back and forth by lawyers, like treaties between warring nations. I was in a small, windowless conference room, the air stale with the scent of old paper. My lawyer put the final decree in front of me, a thick stack of pages that represented the legal death of my family. I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy. My hand was shaking. I looked at the line at the bottom of the page, waiting for my signature, and in that moment, 1,000 ghosts flooded the room. The boy in the bookstore, the man humming off key in a paint-splattered room, the new father looking at me with pure adoration in his eyes. A wave of grief so powerful it buckled me over washed through me. Tears I didn't know I had left began to fall, splashing onto the paper, smearing the ink. This was it, the end, the official, notarized failure of everything I had ever wanted. But then, as I stared at the tear-stained page, another feeling began to surface, rising up through the grief. It was quiet, but it was there. It was relief. The relief of a prisoner who has just been handed the key to her own cell. Signing this paper wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. It was the end of the war in my home, the end of his daily tyranny. It was the first day of my freedom. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped the tears from my eyes, and I signed my name. And with that single stroke of a pen, I closed the book on that life, and took the first terrifying step into a new one. The first few months after the divorce was final were like learning to breathe again after being underwater for a long, long time. The first breath is a gasp. It hurts. The silence in my little apartment, once the kids were with their father, was so loud it felt like a physical presence. I would stand in the middle of the living room and feel the emptiness of the air around me. I'd catch myself making 2 cups of coffee in the morning out of habit. I'd hear a car door slam outside, and my stomach would clench, expecting him to walk through the door. The ghosts of the life I'd lost were everywhere. But alongside the grief, there was this other feeling. It was quiet at first, like a shy whisper. It was freedom. The freedom to not check my phone every 5 minutes, bracing for a hostile text. The freedom to watch what I wanted on television without it being called stupid. The freedom to cry without being accused of being dramatic. One night, I painted my bedroom wall a deep, vibrant teal, a color he would have despised. And as I rolled the paint onto the wall, with my music playing too loud, I started to laugh. It was the first real, unburdened laugh I'd had in years. I was reclaiming my space, my taste, my joy, one small, defiant act at a time. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a messy, circular path. Therapy was my anchor. My therapist gave me a map and a language for the hell I had walked through. She taught me about trauma bonds, about narcissistic patterns, and most importantly, she taught me how to set boundaries. Not as walls to keep people out, but as gates that I, and only I, had the key to. I reconnected with the friends I had been slowly isolated from. I let them hold me, make me laugh, and remind me of the woman I was before I became a soldier in a war. One never signed up for. I started running. At first I could barely make it around the block. But with every step, with every gasp for air, I felt like I was running away from the ghost of my past, and running toward the woman I was becoming. My life today looks nothing like the one I had before, and thank God for that. I live in that same small apartment with the teal wall. It's not a big house, but it's a home. Every corner of it is filled with peace. My routine is my own. I wake up before the sun, and I sit with a cup of coffee in the quiet, not bracing for the day, but welcoming it. The drawings on my refrigerator now are of stick figure families with just 3 people, and they are all smiling. The woman I am now is fundamentally different. I am quieter, but my voice is stronger. I am softer, but I am unbreakable. I learned that my greatest strength wasn't my ability to endure his abuse, but my courage to leave it. I learned that love shouldn't feel like a battle for survival. It should feel like a safe harbor. And I learned that my own intuition, that quiet voice I let him silence for so long, is the most reliable compass I will ever have. Have I forgiven him? That's a complicated question. I don't think forgiveness is about absolving someone for the pain they caused. I will never forget what he did to me, to our children, but I have forgiven the situation for having power over me. I've let go of the rage that was eating me alive. I had to. It was like drinking poison and waiting for him to die. My forgiveness was for me. It was me taking my hand off a hot stove. It was the final act of setting myself free. As for the future, I'm not looking for a hero to ride in and save me. I already did the saving myself. I am open. My heart is not closed. But it is guarded by a woman who knows her own worth now. I'm not looking for someone to complete me. I am already whole. My focus is on raising children who are resilient and kind, who know what healthy love looks like because they see their mother living it, a love for herself, a love for her life. My future is not a destination I'm racing toward. It's the present moment I am finally, fully, peacefully living in. If I could reach back through time, if I could find a way to whisper something to the woman I was at the beginning of all this, what would I say? I can see her so clearly. The woman curled up on the bathroom floor, the cold tile against her cheek, her body shaking with a grief so deep she thought it had a gravitational pull. The woman sitting in her car in a parking lot, unable to stop crying long enough to drive home. The woman staring at her own reflection in the mirror, not recognizing the ghost, with the terrified eyes looking back at her. If I could speak to her, the first thing I would say is, breathe. Just breathe. I know it feels like the air has been stolen from your lungs, but it hasn't. It's still there. Inhale. Exhale. You are still alive. Then, I would take her by the shoulders, look her right in those haunted eyes, and tell her the thing she so desperately needs to hear. I'd say, this is not your fault. His choices are not a reflection of your worth. They are a map of his own brokenness. You did not cause this. You cannot cure it. And you cannot control it. All you can do is survive it. And you will. That little voice inside you, I would whisper, the one you've been told is paranoid and crazy, that's your intuition. It is the truest compass you will ever own. It is not lying to you. Do not let him silence it ever again. Trust it. It will guide you out of this darkness. And finally, I would tell her, I know you feel like you are being erased. I know you feel powerless. But the woman you are about to become, she is being forged in this exact fire. Every tear you cry is watering the seeds of a strength you can't even imagine right now. You will not just survive this, you will rise from it. And one day, you will look back. Not with the agony you feel now, but with a quiet, fierce pride. You will be in awe of what you walked through. And what I would say to her, I am now saying to you. If you are listening to this, and my story feels like your story, if you are in that cold, dark place right now, the place of betrayal, of silent warfare, of feeling utterly and completely alone, hear me. Look at me. The war you are fighting may feel impossible. The loneliness may feel absolute. The weight of it all may feel like it is crushing you. But the strength that is right now, this very second, awakening inside of you, the fierce, unbreakable, magnificent power of a spirit that simply refuses to be extinguished, that will be your greatest victory. You are not crazy, you are not alone. Your happy ending isn't about finding a new love to ride in and rescue you. Your happy ending is about finding yourself again. It's about rescuing the woman who got lost in the noise, the lies, and the pain. It's about coming home to your own soul. That is the war worth fighting. That is the peace you will win. And it will be the most beautiful thing you have ever built.